Amir Rana, thanks, and a very warm welcome to everyone. We have, and the last count was people from 13 different countries have joined us today. So obviously from very different time zones. Some just woke up and had breakfast. Some are preparing probably to go to bed. Uh, but let's this dialogue going now. As you know, as Amir Rana also said, this is the topic today you see on the screen. Uh, and we are going to discuss actually with the help of Zaid Saab that how did this country go from top left-hand corner to bottom right-hand corner. But before I go into that, as also Rana said, a very brief introduction uh, of OPP. The purpose of this organization, it is a platform for the people of Pakistani origin and generally from Asian origin to promote progressive values in a multicultural environment. Our vision is we seek for unity in diversity, and our mission statement reads, strive to eliminate exploitation and discrimination through meaningful dialogues. I saw some text popping up, that's why okay. Uh, our orientations or inclinations, politically, we believe in democracy, human rights, minority rights, which are very badly needed these days, and gender equality. On religious front, we believe in the separation of state and religion. Not that we are critical about any religion or against any religion, absolutely not. The opposite is true. We like all of them. Socially, we believe in full integration of everyone, tolerance and acceptance and harmony. So this is our, and we are not aligned to any political party whatsoever. We started about 5 years ago, and we hold these dialogues regularly on the subjects which are very close to our issues and our problems in our hearts. We also hold every year, end of the year, review and planning meeting, and which is run on a very democratic basis. We invite as many supporters of OPP as we can, and we review the progress of year which is ending and make plans for the following year. Now, those who want to know about more details about us, they can really go to our website, Facebook, can call, can send emails, and so on and so forth. Let me get back to today's topic, and starting it with a quote from Mr. Dubois. And he says, what do nations care about the cost of war if by spending a few hundred millions in steel and gunpowder, they can gain 1,000 millions in diamonds and cocoa? So you see, every war at the end of the day has a very strong economic element built in. And it becomes at the end of the day some kind of business model, and we will see it as we progress through the meeting today. I will just to put some context around Zaid Saab's talk and presentation, very briefly, a few historical highlights from Afghanistan. It has a very rich and very long history. We won't go back to, or at least I wouldn't, to Alexander the Great and what happened afterwards and how many invaders came and what happened to Afghanistan. But let's go to more recent history, which is 1975, when actually most of these things which have to do with today started. Daud Khan overthrows Zahid Shah, and he establishes ties with the USSR. 78 was Taraki Revolution, was a treaty with USSR. He was killed in 1979. Then real thing started, Mujahideen were created. And as we know, these Mujahideens then were funded, trained, armed for jihad. And you may all remember very well that at that time, Mr. Brzezinski from the US, Secretary of State, he stood at the Pakistani border with a Kalashnikov AK-47 in his hand, and he raised the Kalashnikov and he said, Allahu Akbar, we are with you, and God is with you. So this is how the Mujahideens were created. And Ronald Reagan said about them that they are freedom fighters. What that led to was over 1 million Afghans killed, 4 million displaced, more than 4 million by now. Then following step was that Mujahideen, the factions, they turned on each other after Soviet departure, and then was the rise of Taliban. After collapse of Taliban, uh, uh, which was result of 2001 invasion, which was the triggered by 9/11. Then we had George Bush, who had the plans to reconstruct the country. Then the presence was increased by Obama. There was a peace deal by Trump to leave Afghanistan. And then we see Biden pulling out in haste, and Taliban ran over Afghanistan again, even before the pullout was complete. So we had, after 20 years, a bigger chaos than we had at the start of the war. And this is what we went through, just a visual representation of what we went through. Some quotes which basically really sum up what this war has been about and what this country went through. If we look at top quote, Ronald Reagan at the start of the war, he said, those Mujahideens, as I said, are freedom fighters. So that's how it started. And then we had George Bush coming, and he said, Iraq and Afghanistan are now democracies, and they are allies in the cause of freedom and peace. So we went through this transition. Then we heard Barack Obama saying, we need military surge in Afghanistan, and he sent even more troops to eliminate Taliban. Then we had Donald Trump, and I am skipping in between Clinton and before that, Senior Bush. When will we stop wasting our money on rebuilding Afghanistan? We must rebuild our country first. And last but not least, we had Joe Biden. When he pulled out, he said, no regrets. I stand squarely by my decision, because when he was heavily criticized by the disaster created by his pullout. But some allies and UNO and European Union and these NATO, they were not behind. They also made their contribution to this disaster. And if we look at Tony Blair, who was the biggest advocate of wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, he said, I say it's like revolutionary communism, something that is going to have to be knocked out over a long period of time. So he was preparing for a long war, and he was coming up with comparisons with communism, which has, you will see later, played a very big role. Then we had a UN resolution as late as 2020. It said, reaffirming its strong commitment to the sovereignty, independence, territorial integrity, and national unity of Afghanistan, and its support for a peaceful, stable, and prosperous Afghanistan. I mean, beautiful lie. Then we had Theresa May, who said, was our intelligence really so poor? Was our understanding of the Afghan government so weak? Was our knowledge of the position on the ground so inadequate? Did we really believe this? Or did we just feel that we had to follow the United States and hope that with a wink and prayer, it would be all right at the night, Theresa May. And our NATO chief, he said, now recently, this failure of Afghan leadership led to the tragedy we are witnessing today. So he blamed then at the end of the day, everything on the Afghan leadership, which actually they had installed. And last but not least, David Petrus, who was the commander-in-chief or the commander running that operation, his vision was completely different. He said, it's about rooting out every last guy so that there is not even somebody who can fire a single solitary RPG round from some little Kalat out there. So you see, everyone had his own definition, his own interpretation of peace and sovereignty in Afghanistan. Let me introduce, really, really honored to introduce our speaker today, Zahid Hussain. We will call him Zahid Bhai from now onwards, because that's what sounds also very nice and better and friendlier than Mr. Zahid Hussain. He is author, journalist, and a TV analyst, as all of you know. Actually needs no introduction, but just some bullet points, some highlights about him. He is a former correspondent for the Times of London and the Wall Street Journal, covering Afghanistan and Pakistan. So really an authority on the topic today we are discussing. And Mr. Zaid Hussain, or Zaid Bhai, writes regularly for Pakistani daily newspaper Dawn, which is the biggest and oldest English newspaper. He is author of several books, and they include, and I would highly recommend to you to read at least some of them: Frontline Pakistan, The Struggle with Militant Islam, The Scorpion's Tail, The Relentless Rise of Islamic Militants in Pakistan, Pakistan's Tribunal Areas and Regional Security, and No Win War, The Paradox of US-Pakistan Relations in Afghanistan's Shadow. So Zaid Bhai, over to you. I would leave the screen here if you want to share screen or just speak the way you wish. Over to Zaid Bhai.
Okay, thank you so much for inviting me, and it's nice to see so many familiar faces whom I known for many decades. We had struggled together, and but have not met them for many years. So thank you so much actually to invited me and provide me this opportunity to meet you all. Let's Afghanistan. Yes, it's a very it's a tragedy of Afghanistan, I would say. What happened over the last 40 years, 4 decades of war, has left that country completely destroyed. And when you were showing your in screen like various phases of Afghanistan, it reminded me of my first visit to Afghanistan when I started covering Afghanistan for many and international publication. It was 1991, my first assignment in Afghanistan. And I remember actually used to stay at the Kabul hotel, which is now called Serena Hotel. And it reminds me of those times. Although the war has been going on for 10 years. But even then, actually, what I saw from in Kabul at that point, despite the withdrawal of Russian Soviet forces by then 1991, Najib government, the communist government, which was earlier being supported by Soviet Union, I still could see actually, despite the war and destruction, I could see thousands of women going to work at that point in immaculately dressed. And even actually, if you could see actually the number of girls, women going to school, to work, we don't, then we saw when then various phases of Afghanistan I've covered. I covered the civil war in Afghanistan, and that was perhaps the darkest period of Afghanistan history. What happens after 92? Mujahideen groups, which were once supported by United States and Pakistan and other countries, they fought each other to the destruction of Afghanistan. Kabul was not destroyed during the war, Mujahideen war against the Soviet forces. It was destroyed after 1992 when Mujahideen entered Kabul. They destroyed Kabul. They basically there's 4 hills in Kabul, surrounded by hills, and four different Mujahideen groups fighters were actually firing at each other. One hill was controlled by Dostam, one other one was Ahmad Shah Massoud, who was the leader of his own group. And then actually there was some called the Shia group, and the other one actually from outside, forces were bombarding Kabul. And it was on, and it was impossible to drive through to anywhere in the and not being looted by them. So that was the situation when we saw the rise of Taliban from there. Taliban came actually in 1994. They started organizing. They were the product of Afghan civil war. Actually, there was lots of misconception on how they were united. They were all actually, they all belonged to different Mujahideen group and got together and formed this group which is called Taliban. And then that was basically, I think, once thought that they may provide some kind of peace. They were fed up with this civil war going on in Afghanistan, the war against Mujahideen group, the corrupt warlords, and all that. But Afghanistan and the Taliban in 1996, they were able to take over Kabul, establish the conservative Islamic regime. And I think there are two things I must say that the Taliban managed to restore some semblance of peace during that period. But saying all that is that also the period when Afghanistan seems to have no future. It was the kind of conservative regime which has banned everything, banned from TV was banned, women were banned from going to school, they were not allowed to work, even lady doctors actually were not allowed to practice. And that was Afghanistan under Taliban. And the peace was called actually the peace of grave, where peace was there, but actually Afghanistan did not have any future that way. And also in a way, actually, it also become the center of all activities of different kind of transnational terrorist group like Al-Qaeda. Osama bin Laden lived there for about 3 or 4 years. Actually, although he came before the Taliban rule because he had connection with the other Mujahideen groups, and that linkages go back to the anti-Soviet, what is called Holy War. And at that point, all those people who came from different parts of Middle East and Arab countries, including Osama bin Laden, were declared, as you earlier said, that they were the Mujahideen and the fighters for the freedom. Osama bin Laden came to Afghanistan in 1994, established his Al-Qaeda, and during the Taliban period, he got, although he did not get along with Mullah Omar for some time, but later on, he got a space, and that Afghanistan also became the hub of what we call the terrorist activities. And what happened in 9/11 was clearly had its footprints going to Afghanistan and to Al-Qaeda. So that was actually where we saw, Afghanistan entering into another war in 2001, soon after the 9/11 terrorist attack, which was certainly Al-Qaeda was involved, and the planning and whatever was happened, and by the Al-Qaeda. So in a way, actually, what happened 9/11 had turned the history. And actually, the world was never been the same again. It was the worst kind of terrorist attack ever took place, not on the American soil, but anywhere where actually a superpower was attacked, and more than 3,000 people were killed in those attacks in New York and Washington, and that's what we all know. That soon after that, Americans, even a day later, American administration led by the W.G. Bush, who was the president at that time, he took a decision to go into Afghanistan and to punish what he called those people who were, and so that and it was supposed to be a war against Al-Qaeda, and certainly then it also turned a war against the Taliban. So we saw actually within less than a month actually of the terrorist attack, Americans launched a war in Afghanistan in October, and the purpose was the purpose was to punish Al-Qaeda, to kill Osama bin Laden, and to remove Taliban from power. That was the 2 or 3 things which was declared actually the purpose of the war in Afghanistan. But later on, actually, we all know actually it was a kind of revenge for the terrorist attack and for which American forces went into Afghanistan. Uh, there was no clear actually goal for that, except for what it was claimed to punish Al Qaeda, and that basically happened. That yes, actually the Americans managed to get rid of Taliban government, and Al Qaeda was forced to flee. That, but interestingly, the war has been was targeted against Al Qaeda, but only one Al Qaeda leader, Atif, his name was Atif, was killed in that attack, and the rest of the Al Qaeda leaders and the fighters cross over to the border in Pakistan. So Al Qaeda was dislocated, and Taliban government fell very easily because they could not have fight for that against the against a superpower. But and so at that point of time, there's very historical, and which I have mentioned in my book actually, that Kabul fell very easily. Taliban gave up the capital without any fighting. But in Kandahar, where Mullah Omar was based, Taliban leader tried to make deal with Karzai, who was launched in Afghanistan by the CIA to organize it, and then later on he was nominated as the president of the new administration. So I think, and that point actually, Karzai had almost reached some kind of agreement with the Taliban, who were prepared to reconcile with the new reality. But American Secretary of State, Secretary of Defense at that point, declared that they will not, Rumsfeld was the Secretary of Defense at that point. He declared that no Taliban, they will not be pardoned, and they will be punished, and they will kill. Every Taliban is a terrorist. So that way, actually, this full war started in Afghanistan. So after the removal of Taliban, one can say, and after 2 years, President Bush declared at a press conference that the war in Afghanistan have been won, and the objective has been achieved. So in a way, actually, what was the objective of Americans supposed to be at that point was to remove Taliban government, and what is declared change of regime at that point was the most fashionable word. And the Bush administration, they used this, the actually changing of regime. And so they basically also declared that Afghanistan was now a democratic country, and that and they tried to establish or set up a new Afghanistan, and under what they describe as the democratic Afghanistan. But actually, in a way, actually, the government which was installed by America could hardly be called a representative government. And in fact, actually, I have written in my book, actually, what was the original sin? Americans went there, and how how and what gave rise to the insurgency was the Bonn Agreement. Bonn Agreement was happened in December 2001, soon after the fall of Taliban government. Americans actually got together and united under the banner of United Nations. They basically put together a regime which was of the groups comprising the group or anti-Taliban groups. So in a way, actually, that one could say that it actually showed the basis of future insurgency. In fact, actually, who were those who were brought into the government? They basically belong to some ethnic minority ethnic groups, and also actually all the old warlords who were responsible, as I mentioned earlier, in 1990s, they were involved in civil war in Afghanistan, and they destroyed Afghanistan. Their corruption, their atrocities were the reason of rise of Taliban. They were brought back into power. So that was the new government, a new so-called democratic setup, and initiated by the United States and other Western countries. And yes, and at one point, yes, it seemed, and Taliban were completely out of it. And in fact, actually, there was some suggestion by Pakistan that the new setup should also include those Taliban elements who are reconcilable, who would accept the new reality. And that would have actually broadened the base of the new administration, but it did not happen. Taliban were defeated, no doubt about that, and Taliban actually dispersed, and they thought actually the end of it. Quite some of the Taliban leaders who had surrendered were arrested because of this, because of feud with their friend, and sent to Guantanamo Bay. But yes, it was when American declared that they have won the war, they may have been successful in getting rid of Taliban. But Al-Qaeda remains a major problem, and which basically in a way, actually, they started operating from Pakistan. So in a way, the war had spread from Afghanistan to Pakistan also, because Al-Qaeda, which will also later declared a war on Pakistan, and so that was the situation. What happened to Taliban then? When after they were removed from power, most of them thought actually they were defeated, and some of them went back to their homes in different areas of Afghanistan and settled there. And quite a lot of fighters, and particularly the leadership of Taliban, crossed over border to Pakistan. And from there, actually, they in the first for 1 year, actually, they did not know what to do. There was debate. There was a debate within the rank that whether they should start some kind of resistance, armed resistance, or basically continue to, or accept the new reality of Afghanistan. So in a way, actually, Taliban were completely demoralized, dispersed, and they did not have any clear idea what to do next. For 1 or 2 years, that happened. And by then, actually, after a year, they started reorganizing themselves from the Pakistani border areas, particularly what is called later on was called Quetta Shura. And in fact, actually, from there they started beginning. And then actually, in the beginning, they could not get any support in Afghanistan for the reason, actually, I remember speaking to one senior Taliban commander that what happened, and he told me it was not 2006 that on what happened. He said, look, actually, when American forces came, we did not have any means, we had lost that, and we did not have any support base left. And he gave this example that he gave me 5 points. What happened? Look, that there was some expectation among the Afghans that their lot will be changed. There was also disappointment with the Taliban government. How did they rule to Afghanistan? So they had lost that support so there was some kind of expectation now that things would change. And then actually there was an awe of American military might. And another thing actually, like that Taliban were not given any kind of sanctuary within Afghanistan. People would not actually even lend them what they call actually shelter or provide them anything. They refused to do that. So Taliban, it was gone. But what happened later on? How did Taliban started actually gaining ground? For 4 reasons. Number one, which was described to me, was one that after a year or two, the expectation of Afghan that things will change started waning. Then actually they were also suffered by the corruption and atrocities launched by the police force, which was so-called organized by the new government. Then actually there was also discontent about the Americans present there, and by then actually the American forces were seen as an occupation army. And in Afghanistan, we all know the history of Afghanistan, that there is they cannot, they do not actually accept a foreign domination or occupation. So that was American were seen. Initially they were not, but later on they were seen the occupation army. Then there was another thing actually, that indiscriminate attacks by the Kabul government, and actually American forces were used actually bombard this area whenever they were informed by the local warlords that such and such places is basically the Taliban were hiding. So they would bomb, and most of the time civilians were killed. So that actually every attack and every civilian casualty added to Taliban support, and that's how Taliban insurgency started gaining ground. So in a way, actually, as one quite former CIA station chief in Pakistan, Bob Greener, he wrote a book actually called 80 Days to to Kandahar. And so his analysis was quite interesting. He said that Americans won the first Afghan war, but soon after, in 2004, 2005, American enter into second Afghan war when the Taliban insurgency started growing, and that was also a period when we saw actually that while Americans have take off their focus from Afghanistan, they went into Iraq, thinking that the Taliban were history, and that and they have change of regime in Afghanistan has fulfilled, and Afghanistan has become a democratic country. So in a way, actually, initially, Americans did not have any plan of what they later on described nation building. They were only interested in actually in changing the regime, and that's what. So Taliban started gaining ground after organizing initially from the Pakistan. They started to find some kind of support base in Afghanistan. People were fed up with who were fed up in the region and started organizing, and also actually the ethnic factor, which was used by the Taliban to reorganize themselves. As I said, actually, the Bonn Agreement established a government which were dominated by Pashtun population as basically against the Pashtuns. So that also started this impression that this war was against the Pashtuns. So Taliban have largely predominantly were Pashtuns, and that they so initial what we witnessed actually the initial resistance to the American and Kabul government came from the Pashtun belt of southern Afghanistan as well as eastern Afghanistan. So they become the hub of resistance. And so so the second Afghan war started building up. And by 2010, Taliban, according to the Americans' own report, what is called SIGAR report, which was SIGAR is an organization, which was established by the American administration to analyze how the war in Afghanistan was going. According to its report in 2010, Taliban had managed to establish their influence in large part of Afghanistan. I'm not saying it did not mean that they have become control over those areas, but certainly they have the influence, and their influence has started expanding, and they were helped actually with the collapse of whatever the administration or I will not say collapse, non-existent of the authority of the Kabul government. So that way actually that created a vacuum and Taliban started gaining ground. And by 2010, there was a report that Taliban could take over Afghanistan at any time at that point, when new American administration had already been installed under Obama. And when Obama came to power, he declared Afghanistan as a good war. He said actually that the bad war was Iraq, and he decided to pull out from Iraq. But basically for him, Afghanistan was a good war. And also at that point, then American strategy seems to be changing. There was talk about nation building, and from the regime change to nation building. And then we also saw actually that the justification that human rights issues came up, and also that protection of women rights. So all those came later on. Actually, that was not the part of initial American strategy in Afghanistan. There was no mention of nation building at all. But still, actually, when with the nation building so-called it started, so it was a kind of this was a dichotomy, the contradiction in itself, because nowhere in the world nation building could be done by an occupation army. It can never be done. Like, for example, so that was the thing. And 2010, the situation was getting so bad. So that was the period when President Obama decided to increase the number of troops in Afghanistan. That is called first surge in troops. And then actually soon afterward, the more troops were sent. And at one point, around 2011, 2012, actually, the number of US troops had gone up to almost 170,000, and total number of NATO forces in Afghanistan at that point was 200,000, which is a huge actually, and that all their actually, it was the biggest power on earth was involved in Afghanistan war against, but it did not stop the Taliban insurgency. And the worst thing which Obama did, which could give Taliban a kind of more impetus and time and to reorganize, was that after sending more troops, he also gave a kind of deadline that within 18 months, which means actually by 2014, he said the American troops will be taken out and they will be withdrawn. So in a way, 18-month deadline was given to the American forces, which was sent to clear Afghanistan from Taliban. And that deadline, actually, the famous saying by Taliban commander that you may have the watch, but we have the time. So in a way, actually, that Taliban used it during that period. They lied low, but basically waiting for the American deadline to come to complete and withdrawal of the forces. But and then actually, as a part of that strategy, Americans also decided to organize what they call Afghan national forces, and to form the various criteria. So I'm just giving the example because it will figure out how the force was organized and what happened later on. So in a way, actually, that Afghan army was created, and Afghan forces, with the view that they will replace the American forces and then take over the security responsibility. And by 2014, actually, American declared that they were ready to draw down, not withdraw, but draw down the troops, and then give responsibility to the Afghan administration and also the Afghan National Army. So that way, it was seen actually that the situation was right, but it did not stop Taliban actually, because the American strategy completely failed. And so in a way, by 2016, the American troops, about few thousand American troops were left in Afghanistan. And then then and that was the period when we saw a huge rise in Taliban insurgency. But Americans did not have a clear strategy even then. They were still believe actually, particularly the military, American military, still thought that they could achieve a military victory in Afghanistan. And patriots who was sent to Afghanistan, he was had earlier led the American forces in Iraq, and he was sent to Afghanistan to what they call actually to use the same strategy in Afghanistan, and but it failed. And by 2018, the Americans started exploring, talking to Taliban, but there was no clear strategy. Obama did not have he could not resist the influence of American forces. And even those people like Biden, who was vice president, wanted actually Americans to negotiate with Taliban. And Biden in 2010 was opposed to the surge in Afghanistan. So it come back. So in a way, actually, when Trump came, Trump was maverick, and he had already decided that he would pull out from Afghanistan. It was a part of the promise he made during his campaign. So in a way, actually, first coherent negotiations with the Taliban, with the aim for political settlement, came under Trump, and this quite and for 18 months, we all know actually what happened. The dialogue or negotiations continued with the Taliban. In a way, actually, those groups, those elements, Taliban insurgents, who were once declared a terrorist, and Americans actually pledged to wipe them out. Americans were sitting with them. And interestingly, most of the Taliban commanders or the leaders who were sitting across the table either had been detained in Guantanamo. They were freed under an agreement, 5 of them, and they were brought back to Doha for talks. And then Mullah brother, who we all know was in Pakistan detention for 9 years, and it was actually because of the Americans. Americans told Pakistan not to release him, but when negotiations started, it was the Americans asked Pakistan to release him. So in a way, it was irony of history, what I call irony history, that those people who the Americans came to destroy were actually sitting across the border, and they and America were talking peace with them. In fact, actually 2019, when this 2020, sorry, 2020 February, when Doha Agreement was signed, it was a surrender of a document of surrender by United States. And whatever happened actually was inevitable about Doha after Doha Agreement, because Americans recognize Taliban as a force. And they basically, when you sign an agreement with a group, which means that you have recognized them as the future Afghan administration. So in a way, then actually after 18 months, they were supposed to withdraw. And I think at the end of Trump's regime government, only less than 2,500 American troops were left. And when Biden came, he got this, he always wanted actually to exit this war, and so he basically completed or whatever actually the plan was, and withdrawal came. But what happened over the last 10 days? It's remarkable. I mean, when April the withdrawing started, and when in August, first week, I think last American troops were left Afghanistan, and even contractors, and they vacated it. And so in a way, actually, withdrawal of America brought the history to the full circle. I mean, from 20 years of war, fighting against Taliban, and Taliban returned to power. But what happened last 10 days? But there's a lot of curiosity how the Kabul government fell so easily. It was logical, I would say. We also, although I did not expect them to come to take over Kabul so easily. The reason was that the Afghan National Army was organized from the strike, and it ethnically divided army. It was basically, in a way, it was an extension of American forces. It was not actually a separate thing. And even the Air Force, which was created, Afghan Air Force, which was created by, it was all run by the contractors. So once contractors and the forces were withdrawn, this Afghan forces just collapsed like a thing, because the American, even the backing was not there. And I think probably they did. And the other thing is that there was little faith in Kabul government. Why? There were big question marks. Why should they fight it? And the Americans, actually, the entire army, Afghan army, was supported by American finance. 75% of Afghanistan's budget came from the foreign aid. and Americans were investing about $4 billion, more than $4 billion, just to sustain the Afghan forces. So obviously that crumbling came, and it was actually thing. Now Taliban are back in a way. A new situation in Afghanistan has emerged. Now the Taliban are from insurgent group to they have now ruling the country, and it is never easy for insurgent group to take over to govern. Actually, they have all kind of problems. So I think what we are witnessing in Afghanistan is a period of still a period of uncertainty, despite the Taliban control over Afghanistan. Taliban, ironically, Taliban have now full control over Afghanistan. They did not have even the first during the first government. In first government, they did not have the full control of Afghanistan. A large part, I would say at least 10 to 15% of Afghan territory was controlled by the opposition, led by Ahmed Shah Massoud. So in a way, they are controlling it. Now, actually, there is a huge problem, a challenge, not only for Taliban, but also actually a huge concern for the international community, what will happen. Because the dilemma is that they cannot allow the Taliban to collapse. Because if the Taliban collapse, then there's civil war, and that will create havoc to the regional countries. It will have direct implications for the countries like Pakistan, Iran, China, Russia, and also actually for the global peace. But the basic problem in Afghanistan is after Americans have spent more than $3 trillion in this war. Afghanistan is much worse. 97%, according to the UN agencies, 97% of Afghan population now live below the poverty line. And the biggest, one of the, this human catastrophe is waiting to happen. So in a way, actually, the dilemma of the international community, on the one hand, they do not want to recognize the Taliban for obvious reasons, for all those conditions, because of the pressure and domestic pressure in those countries, Western countries. But on the other side, they are dealing with the Taliban, and they have to actually. So this is what we're seeing actually at the point of time. Is a period of uncertainty still continuing, and a big question mark whether the Taliban could continue to govern. Other problem is that there has been a massive exodus of educated Afghan population. So who will run the government? The other challenge for the Taliban is that they may have the same ideology, old conservative ideology, but it cannot work. Afghanistan has changed. From last 20 years, whatever actually the ruins of war, we can say. But a large Afghans have now a young population which has been educated and also have a greatest awareness of whatever is happening. For Taliban to bring back actually the old conservative and retrogressive system will not be acceptable for them. There may not be an organized resistance to Taliban as we have seen in the past in 1990s. But Taliban, if the situation, human situation, and other human rights violation takes place, there could be a kind of revolt against Taliban. At this point of time, Taliban seems to have little change in their attitude than 1990s. Because of the changing situation, now they allow that the television, the girls are allowed to go to school up to the primary, but they're still actually waiting for whether they are allowed to go after class. But it varies the situation from region to region. In some part, Taliban has shown some degree of flexibility on education, women education. But on the other part, which is a much more backward tribal region, Taliban still actually have not allowed. So in a way, there is a pressure from the international community to improve it. But on the other hand, actually, there's a dread, there's a fear that if Taliban government collapse and they have not been able to control the situation, a new civil war can break up. And that will create a kind of situation which nobody will be able to control. I'll stop here because I've already taken a lot of time and would love to have your questions.
Thank you very much, Zahid Hussain Sahab, for a nice talk. And now I want to open the floor for the questions, and you can also comment. You want however, please raise your hands. There is a raise hand icon as well, so that I could know, or otherwise you just raise your hand so I can see you and ask you. So I have one question I want to start with. Uh, um, Here is Miss Iram, I think. She wanted to ask some question. Miss Iram? Yeah. Uh, okay. Then I ask Pradeep, please, can you please ask your question?
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, जाहिद साहब नमस्कार
जी।
आप सब लोगों को मेरा सलाम। मेरा क्वेश्चन ये है कि आपने जैसा खुद ही बताया कि
Pradeep,
पाकिस्तान
Pradeep, sorry to cut you. Can you please ask your question in English, because a lot of for our audience cannot understanding Hindi or Urdu.
Absolutely no issue, sir.
Yeah, please. Thank you.
Zaid Sahab, my question to you is, you yourself said that when Taliban ran from Afghanistan, they came to Pakistan and Pakistan supported. I assume that your meaning was you are saying that the Pakistan government supported Taliban to regroup and go back to Afghanistan and try for a change of government over there. Now, US has been a long time ally, almost last 74 years. US has been supporting Pakistan financially for various matters. What was the objective of Pakistan supporting Taliban and in turn making US as an enemy?
Well, actually, I didn't say that Pakistan government said. Look, actually, one should also understand what happened after the war started. The Taliban came, and there was no pressure. America never asked Pakistan to stop them to coming in, because in fact, actually, Americans said that open your borders for the Afghan refugees to come in. I mean, that was also the condition. So it was because, as I said, actually, America was not concerned in the beginning about the Taliban revival or Taliban. They basically there was a belief in American establishment, that Taliban are history. So in a way, actually, they came, the Pakistani authorities, look at the side, and in fact, actually, it was not like Pakistan government was supporting it. In fact, actually, in the Pakistan, they got here. They had connection here, the long time connection here, because most of them actually had lived here during the anti-Soviet war. They have been actually operating from there. The same people lived on the both sides of the border, and they find it easy to them. But no, it's not like actually, because Pakistan did actually support. Cooperated with America when it came to fighting Al Qaeda, but from the very start, Pakistan has a reservation, and they have been asking America to reach some kind of political settlement with Taliban. It was not like actually the government level had supported it. No, but they knew actually the war it could not be done militarily. So in a way, actually, it's a very complex situation. It's not like actually later on, when the Americans started putting pressure on Pakistan to take action again, that already facing its problem of militancy. As you all know, actually, that new TTP, the Pakistani Taliban have emerged, and at that point, actually, to fight both actually the kind of Afghan Taliban and Pakistani Taliban had become kind of rather impossible. And obviously, then when Americans wanted actually Pakistan's help to bring up Taliban on the negotiating table. So that was the Pakistan's reason that, look, actually, what do you want? Actually, would you want us to fight them, or do you want actually them to come to bring to the negotiating table? So it's a more of a complex situation. And obviously, Pakistan has also some kind of apprehension. It's not like a straightforward thing, because when Pakistan faced, Pakistan military was also fighting their own Taliban from we all know actually what happened from 2007 to 2014. Pakistan's tribal region had virtually been under the control of the Pakistani Taliban. There is a very thin line between Pakistani Taliban and the Afghan Taliban. So in a way, Pakistan's huge dilemma, but they could not have taken both of them. So even the rise of Taliban created some kind of apprehension in Pakistan. I'm talking about the security establishment. They were also fear that that any control of Taliban in Afghanistan will give impetus to the insurgency or to the terrorist groups in Pakistan. So that was a mixed feeling. On the one side, actually, they had other compulsion, but on the other side, there was also apprehension that so it is not like actually that Pakistan necessarily wanted Taliban to take over. Pakistan wanted actually the Americans to reach some kind of political settlement, so that what the famous saying from some of the establishment is that they wanted Afghan Taliban to look towards Kabul instead of looking towards Islamabad or supporting it. So in a way, actually, it's a tricky relationship. But certainly, yes, actually, because their initial period in Pakistan did help them to reorganize. There's no doubt about that. But it's not like actually that they were deliberately being supported by the Pakistani establishment. They have actually huge support base among the Pakistani, religious groups like JUI and others. Actually, they were actually support based. They had support base in Pakistan. The people who had fought along with them actually during Soviet war, anti-Soviet war, they were all there. So yes, one can say that Pakistan, but Pakistan's position is from very beginning, from very outside the American, they were saying that talk to Taliban and preach some kind of political essay.
Okay.
But the
Thank
fact
you very
that
much.
Osama
Yeah, please continue.
I'm sorry. The very fact that Osama bin Laden was found in Abbottabad, do you mean to say that the government establishment as well as the defense forces of Pakistan were not aware of this fact?
Look, yes, I think you have forgotten one thing. Actually, most of the Al-Qaeda leaders were arrested from Pakistan or killed from Pakistan. That included the top leadership. I'm talking about Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, Abu Zubaydah. I can give you hundreds of them. There were more than 400 major Al-Qaeda leaders were arrested from Pakistan and the joint operation with the CIA. So as far as cooperation Al-Qaeda was concerned, it was actually when Americans have almost admitted that it was very useful. And that, if you remember, actually, President Bush press conference 2004, that Al-Qaeda is finished. Yes, actually, that it was very embarrassing when he was found, Osama bin Laden found. But don't forget about the others, all top leaders were also arrested and captured by Pakistan.
Yeah, thank you, Zahid bhai, and thank you, Pradeep. Now, Mr. Rais Sarim, you want to ask some question, please? Please unmute yourself first.
One thing I will, sorry, I have to leave for other session at my conference session at 7:30. So I have another 25 minutes. So.
Yeah, please.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Zahid Chandra. Very profound knowledge and you have delivered information. So thank you for that. My question is going to, we know that as Trump came to power, he demonstrated a very profound friendship with Saudi Arabian. You have seen this, they were dancing together with swords, and that was a big and deep friendship there. And later on, by the talks, the negotiation with Taliban, the USA has selected Doha for talks and not Saudi Arabia. Was it a pre-planned political strategy of the United States, or was it a one-man show from Trump that have to make both sides? Because it was quite open that Doha and Saudi Arabian, they were not one at that time. Thank you very much. If you can.
No, I think there's it was, the office was established with the consent of United States, no doubt about that. But Karzai also was the president of Afghanistan. It was also his consent that they wanted actually. Now, when they started thinking about negotiating, they needed actually some kind of office. But Taliban, yes, actually, Saudi Arabia was also mentioned at one point. Saudi Arabia and Turkey. And Qatar, 3 actually places were actually mentioned, but Taliban refused to open office in Saudi Arabia and also or Turkey. So they decided actually that Doha was a better place for them.
Thank you very much. Dr. Ishtiaq, please unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Zahid Hussain Saab. I'm a great admirer of yours and learn a lot from your articles. I just wanted your impression or assessment that if the Taliban were to consolidate their hold over Afghanistan, can Pakistan now, because in the first phase Pakistan failed, but can Pakistan now hope to convince them to agree to the Durand line becoming the international border between Pakistan and Afghanistan, because this has been Pakistan's greatest security fear, the way I understand. Thank you.
Yes, I think it is not like actually that Taliban will accept or become the kind of protege for Pakistan. They may have a better relations with other because with Pakistan for several reasons, but there is also quite a lot of apprehension. You are absolutely right that even the first government, when it was fully backed at that point, fully backed by Pakistan, because no other country except briefly Saudi Arabia and UAE had recognized, but after a while they also withdrew their support or recognition from. So it was totally dependent on Pakistan. Even then, actually, they on various issues did not actually accept Pakistan's even advice or what request. The Durand line was, and their theory was that for Muslims, actually, there shouldn't be any boundary. I mean, that's a very ambiguous thing. Then also there were several occasions, like for example, some of the Pakistani terrorist group belonging to sectarian organization, like and other, they took refuge in Afghanistan. And when Pakistan's interior minister at that time, Janwani Haider, under Musharraf government, went to ask Mullah Omar to send them. He said, nothing doing. They are Mujahideen. They cannot get it. And then actually, you all remember actually what happened actually when Bamiyan happened. They refused to listen to Pakistan. So in a way, actually, it may be Pakistan. It was expediency for Pakistan. Expediency that they were Taliban support actually not because of the ideological reason, but for the strategic reasons they were supporting Taliban. So, but it does not mean that Taliban were actually were protege of Pakistan. But much more, situation has changed tremendously now. Now Taliban are not the same one. They are not ostracized by the other countries. A very interesting development, like Iran, the first government during Taliban's first regime, they were basically loggerheads, Iran and Taliban, and at one point they went almost to war with each other. But lately, after doing and Iran played a huge role in installing post-Taliban government. They because had a good connection with Northern Alliance and other anti-Taliban group. But later on, actually, the war progressed. Iran actually developed a good relation with Taliban. And it's not, I mean, it's quite surprising. A lot of Taliban leaders lived in Iran. Their family is still living. And if one of the biggest example was Mullah Mansoor Akhtar, who was actually the successor of Mullah Omar after his death. Actually, he was appointed the Amir of Taliban. He was killed by American drone when he was returning from Iran, and his family lived there. He was that very so it is and similarly, Russia, for its own reason, because of the fighting, they were concerned about the rise of Daesh in the northern Afghanistan, and because they felt actually that is going to affect the Central Asian countries, and because Russia's major concern was that Daesh, Chechens, for example, were the largest foreign contingent of forces fighting in Middle East. So in a way, the rise of Daesh on the border of Central Asian nation was actually seen as a security threat to Russia also. So in a way, actually, it was those tactical reasons, for not a strategic reason, tactical reason, that they supported the Taliban. Right, there are evidence that Taliban received some kind of financial support from Russia also during their fighting against them while they were fighting against the American forces. So in a way, Taliban have a greater actually now reach to other countries. So in a way, Pakistan's apprehension is right actually, because TTP, for example, 4,000 to 5,000 TTP are based in here, and they are basically those who have been fighting the Pakistani forces. So Pakistan's main concern whether Taliban would stop them, contain their activities or not. But so far, actually, there has not been any sign or evidence that Afghan Taliban will take action. In fact, actually, that Pakistan's concern is also that there has been surge in terrorist activities launched by TTP over the last few months. In fact, more. I mean, if you see actually this year alone, about more than 100 Pakistani soldiers and officers have been killed in the terrorist attacks launched by TTP from across the border.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ishaq.
But one thing more actually, I think Durand line is not much of a concern because de facto it is recognized by the.
Yeah,
so
I know. But Pakistan's main worry has been that this is, and that's been Pakistan's main worry. Whereas on the eastern border, we don't want that to be the international border.
Exactly.
So we have a contradictory position on Kashmir, no, but on Afghanistan, yes. Pakistan's, paradoxes are beyond any rational explanation.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Tahira ji, can you please ask your question?
Assalamu alaikum. I had actually written my question down for Zahid Saab. Assalamu alaikum, Zahid Saab. Do you agree with the view that the Pakistani militablishment has still not given up its old policy of viewing Afghanistan on the northwestern border as strategic depth versus old enemy India on the eastern border, and the TTA as military assets? And secondly, what is the current status of TTA's relations with the TTP? Thank you.
Actually, I think probably this theory of strategic depth has gone actually for a very long time. In fact, actually, if anybody has this illusion that Taliban government in Afghanistan will provide them sanctuary or strategic depth, was completely wrong. Because in fact, actually, Pakistan's support to the Taliban government in the first time had provided strategic depth to the militants inside Pakistan, and which we have seen actually what happened later on. So in a way, actually, it is the Taliban who got a strategic depth within Pakistan because they have been operating from here. So in a way, actually, Pakistan cannot think about having strategic depth because, as I earlier mentioned, Taliban will not be a protege of Pakistan that way. They have their own. So to think about that will provide or no. In fact, actually, if I was at a conference just now, a complete session with Indians, and they all actually now talking about having relations with the Taliban government. And in fact, Taliban are much more pragmatic. As I said, actually, they have various options. They will develop some kind of, I'm not saying that they will become ally of India, but certainly they will maintain some kind of, they're talking to Americans, they're talking to Russia, they're talking to all other countries. So thinking about that, anybody mad actually insane that could think that Afghanistan will become their strategy. No, there's no illusion of that. In fact, Pakistan's major concern, and I'm repeating kind of saying, that Afghan Taliban and Pakistani Taliban are the same, the different sides of the same coin. And that is the biggest concern, what's going to happen with the TTP. TTP as I said, actually, for the last 1 year, this year alone, the more attacks than we have seen over the last 2 or 3 years, TTP. So that is basically a major security concern for Pakistan also.
Thank you. Mr. Kazalbash, can you please ask your question? And then Masood Bhai, I come to you.
Thank you. In fact, I'd written my question down for you to share with Zahid. But the question I have is, however haphazard the withdrawal of the US and NATO from Afghanistan, do you not feel, or what is your view on the fact that it was done deliberately in order to poke China in the eye, in other words, to cause disruption to the Road and Belt Initiative of China by creating insecurity in just at the heart of the Road and Belt Initiative? Thank you.
No, I don't believe in that, because more of these Americans have lost this war and they had decided to leave Afghanistan for quite some time. I mean, like if the last, the term of Obama administration, they had started talking to Taliban, but they did not have clear strategy. There was no way actually they could have stayed in Afghanistan. It was not a situation. It became very apparent to the Americans. I mean, maybe actually some elements within the military still wanted to continue that war, but generally actually that was accepted that they cannot stay there anymore. So if that's what we saw actually from Trump administration, one thing, there have a huge differences between between Trump and Biden on every issue, every foreign policy issue. But there was one actually issue, Afghanistan, was they have complete agreement on this. And there's no appetite for in America, if you could see any opinion poll. Afghanistan was not mentioned in the campaign at all, in the presidential election campaign. As far as this concerned, I don't believe actually that is true for China and that they have actually unstable. I mean, if Americans have so much control of everything, what happened, they would not have lost this war after fighting 20 years. Like we think actually that they can command everything. Americans' policy was at drift. If you read actually this book, which is called Afghanistan Paper, it was first published in form of articles in Washington Post. Now that's a book come. If you read that, and that was the interviews taken by the cigar, as I mentioned earlier, it was a kind of body, Inspector General, who was supposed to analyze one situation for the government, and read that book, and so you will understand what was happening in Afghanistan. So in a way, actually, there was no way Americans could have stayed there. And I agree with President Biden that even if they had stayed for 1 year, it would not have made any difference. Americans had to exist, and it may be actually very humiliating exit, fine, but there was no other way.
Thank you. Masood Mirza sir.
Thank you. Sir, don't you think that taking over power by Taliban in Kabul, it would be also very dangerous for Pakistan in the long run, because as you have also alluded, it would give impetus to right-wing extremism and religious fanaticism in Pakistan. And moreover, the role of the civil government in Pakistan, it is giving signals of support to the Taliban government, and about the military role of the military establishment, because in the aftermath of the APS attacks, that Army Public School in December 2014 in Peshawar, and at that time, the military also changed its policy. Don't you think this situation is very, very confusing, and in the long run, it is also very dangerous for Pakistan? Okay.
Well, actually, there's a Pakistan predicament. That's what I'm saying. Actually, there was, Taliban takeover was inevitable. And even the West, actually, with United States, we declared as a terrorist group, some part of Taliban, like Haqqani group, they were negotiating with this. So Pakistan predicament was that Taliban had come to power. And that basically now it is a dilemma for not only for Pakistan, but every country. And Pakistan, yes, you are absolutely right. It will have actually whatever happens in Afghanistan will have a spillover effect in Pakistan. I mean, if Pakistan, I mean, we have seen actually 40 years of war is spilling over to across the border. And the biggest concern, as I earlier mentioned, about the TTP's presence in Afghanistan. And TTP, demands of TTP has also strong links with the Afghan Taliban. And that's what actually I said, that there has been a kind of escalation in terrorist attacks in Waziristan and other places. Yes, there will be a problem. And that is basically a dilemma for every regional countries too, because the other thing is that, there are transnational terrorist groups also operating from Afghanistan. And the thing is that Taliban have given this word or promised that they will allow the Afghan soil to be used by anything. So one can is still actually waiting whether Taliban will have the capacity or also actually will fulfill its promise to do that. And the Pakistan's biggest nightmare is also that if it will give impetus to the militant groups operating inside Pakistan, well, actually, let's see, actually, Taliban have promised that they will not, but there are a lot of skepticism here. And I think probably more than military establishment, our Prime Minister, have shown much more sympathy with the Taliban. Talking about TTP, and he's too eager to talk to them and to settle them. And it is his old thing. At one, he suggested that TTP should be allowed to set office in Peshawar, if you remember. So that is the biggest danger for Pakistan. There's no doubt about that, and that will give some kind of impetus and also kind of encouragement to the extremist group. There is no doubt. But falling of Taliban will create equally bad situation for not only for Pakistan. Like, for example, if civil war starts, so far, there was less actually, no refugee has, in fact, we have seen in Pakistan. But once actually the civil war, if it collapses, that it will create such a problem for the region. The terrorism, which we are scared of, that will increase. So there's is a kind of a new dilemma for us.
So, I'm reading a question of Ms. Iram Sajid.
I think this is the last question I'll take. Sorry, I have to leave it.
So last question. Okay, fine. She was asking that Pakistan has been remained involved in Afghanistan issues. What benefits Pakistan has secured whatsoever? Shouldn't Pakistani government and shouldn't Pakistani government and people focus issues within its border that have been affecting the society? The extension of this question is that as well, that we have seen recently after takeover Taliban, that here many Afghan groups or organization and people either they come up, they came on the roads to protest against Pakistan and in social media as well, a lot. So this is very strange when you say that Pakistan has lost its interest long ago.
No, I'm not saying that.
Or influence.
No. Influence. Yes, influence. That's what I'm saying actually, that it is not actually that they can dictate. Afghan society has been polarized for very strongly. It's not like actually that's the first time the anti-Pakistani protests we have seen in Kabul. It has been actually like for last 70 years, if you go back to the history. So there is a huge polarization. Certainly there's a huge, and it goes back even to the Mujahideen period. When Pakistan was supporting one side or Mujahideen actually with other Western country, there was resentment, and quite a lot of people in Afghanistan blamed Pakistan for whatever was happening. That they may be right or may be wrong. Actually, that's a totally different thing there. But that polarization has been created from then. And what I'm saying actually, it maybe like so. It is not like even if Pakistan, for example, do not say, okay, we will not support Taliban. It does not mean anything. Even that's what I'm trying to say, that Taliban, whatever, I mean, that's a very obscurantist, regime that is conservative. The Pakistan, I still believe that with this kind of ideology, it will be very difficult for Afghanistan to move forward. All that happened. But can Pakistan stop them? No. I mean, like if I was just saying Iran, China, X, Y, Z, all countries. Look, actually, Americans talk to them. The basic Doha Agreement. What was Doha Agreement? Americans signed almost on dotted line. So was it Pakistan, could control actually, not the Taliban should come to power? No, there has also been actually a huge resentment against America. Why did they leave? There's also, some sentiment, but one can also understand actually the Americans could not stay forever. They have already losing that. And the policy of big power is dictated by their own interests. They were not actually, they hardly, I mean, like now you could listen to the Americans, they said least border, whatever in Afghanistan. There may be some internal domestic pressure where they talk about the women's rights, but did they go there to protect women's rights? No, because they went into Afghanistan because of their own security reason. So that's what I'm saying actually, that so I know, if you could see that how the Iranian Taliban leaders have taken refuge in Iran. So this is kind of situation which and yes, actually Taliban will have a face huge challenge in Afghanistan, huge challenge, a new generation of Afghan there. I mean, like they have seen some kind of freedom, not freedom, but basically rights, actually, women working, and so it's very easy for them to accept any situation where they have completely out of their work. No, there will be resistance for them, and there's already, we have seen signs of that.
Well, thank you very much, Zaid Bhai. I think you said you have to leave at 7:30.
Sorry about that, but
no, it's okay. It's okay. Thank you very much. I think that was very illuminating information and discussion. I think while you leave, we can take another couple of questions. We have a fantastic backup in Dr. Ishtiaq. There are a couple of questions.
Very nice to see Dr. Ishtiaq. I've been a very admirer of his work, and particularly on Jinnah, his latest book, and I'm looking forward to read that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Zaid Bhai. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you
very much, sir.
Thank you, Zaid. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
I think we can take a couple of more questions to answer, and then we can move to closing the official part of the session. So who wants to go?
So I think no more questions. We can take questions at the informal session. Okay. So can you please start closing remarks?
Okay. So, okay, it's all set. Okay, let's let's move to the closing part of our dialogue today. I think we all were listening very carefully to what Zaid Bhai was saying, and I was taking notes. So if we really boil it down, we see a consistent pattern, which started actually with Truman from 1941 to something like 1992, which was a very clear doctrine to contain communism. I think this is what the American interference has been about, not only in Afghanistan, but also in many other countries. And in that process, we all know that they have had assassinations of people, of political opponents, of political leaders who were sympathizing with the communists or with the left-wing politics, and they prevented them from coming to power. They kind of manipulated the elections. So they did everything they could do, in fact, to follow that doctrine, which resulted actually in a very well-planned political warfare worldwide, including in Europe. We saw extension, espionage, we saw assassinations, as I said, we saw rigging of elections in various countries, attempted coups in many countries, creating terrorist groups and sustaining them using religion, in particular Islam, as a parallel ideology to replace communism or to fight communism, and thus fueling and supporting extremism. And they wanted, their policy has been to contain every single country that can be in any way, any challenge to the US and their allies. We have seen as a result, Guantanamo Bay, we all know about it, Abu Ghraib, Bagram, black sites, interrogation centers in several countries, which they have been using to torture people. And what actually George Bush did, he declared the whole world a battlefield. The clever thing about war and terror was that they used to have wars against geographies, against countries. But for the first time, they said they are fighting terrorism in the whole world. So whole world is battlefield. They don't have to ask anyone. They can fly to any country, bomb any country, and have operations in any country they wanted. Then, as Zahid Bhai said as well, coming to Afghanistan, that there was no ingoing strategy or an exit strategy, and there was no clear definition of victory, because normally when you plan wars, and they went into this war kind of less than a month after 9/11, so they didn't have that kind of time to make a long-term strategy. And as a result, they have been changing their positions as the war evolved. So in the last 20, 30 years, you see that they started with getting even with the USSR, because then they created Mujahideens, etc. But when USSR pulled out, they abandoned Afghanistan. If they would have stayed another couple of years with a fraction of the money they ended up spending, Afghanistan might have been a better place. Then comes the 9/11 revenge, and it was really, as not Dr. Zahid Bhai said, that it was really purely a revenge action to go after bin Laden. Then Taliban, they removed from powers. Then Bush started talking about democracy. Then they started talking about nation building, then about women's rights, education. And then we are back to Taliban, back to square one after 20 years. I mean, how could you be talking about democracy and nation building if you are cooperating with the warlords? You are breaking down all the structures in the society, of the tribal society. I mean, no way, these two things don't go together at all. And as a result, we saw that we went back to square one, actually to -1, by bringing the Taliban back in a way they came. And they did all this with their usual imperialist arrogance and forcing the change, which was in self-interest. And I'm repeatedly saying USA, but it is not just USA, because they were all ISAF forces, NATO forces, UNO, all their allies, because at some point we had 36 countries in the world contributing to the forces or to the troops which were present in Afghanistan. They had total disregard of the international law of human rights, right of self-determination, because the stories which we always knew are coming out now, and everyone is accepting them, that the amount of human right abuse that has taken place under their watch in that territory, in that area. They did not go in the beginning for a war economy or a business, because there was nothing to get out of Afghanistan as such. But as the war evolved, we saw also it turned into a business model, because they developed a kind of war economy. They privatized the war, because at the peak of the war, we had, if we had 100,000 regular soldiers, we had 300,000 private contractors. So the ratio was 1 to 3 between the regular army and the private contractors. So they basically privatized the war, and that was the neoliberal model, and developing a contractor economy. And essentially the economy in Afghanistan that evolved as such was also kind of based on this contractor and a war economy. Pakistan had to pay, or the people of Pakistan, a very heavy price, in the sense because we all thought, oh, because the war going on, USA and their allies, they need us, they will kind of give us money as well. Yes, they did. But in the last analysis, we ended up, the cost to Pakistan is estimated over $250 billion, which is 5 times more than we ever received, or Pakistan ever received in funds from the USA to fight the war. So it was not a good deal in money as well to Pakistan. I mean, we ended up having between 50 to 80,000 deaths as well. And our external debt, it in 2020 rose to over $130 billion. So it didn't make any sense for us, though we hoped it might it might end up in some kind of positive aspects. Then next one. And the evidence of this war economy and consultant economy is also that if you see between 2008 and 2018, we had 380 high-ranking officials from the US government who became lobbyists or defense contractor consultants or became board members and executives within 2 years after leaving the military. So this became a very lucrative business, even for very senior ranking officials to leave and become the consultants or become the consultants to contractors. The estimates vary between 2.26 trillion to $3-4 trillion, which have been spent on the war in Afghanistan. This figure we all know it. It is $300 million a day being spent on a war. And don't tell me that that US or capitalist countries, they went in investing $300 million a day just because they wanted to bring democracy, they wanted to help women, they wanted to build a school, and they wanted to really reconstruct this poor country. Only on training Afghan army, which they said they have trained 300,000 soldiers, they spend, they say, $85 billion. And as a reference, I put in the brackets, the GDP of Afghanistan in 2019 was 19 billion. So you spend more than 4 times of the annual GDP to train 300,000 soldiers who disappeared in less than a month. And in the US, the war economy was blossoming so much that the people who invested $10,000 in defense stock when the war started, now it's worth more than 100. So 10 times multiplied your investments you had if you bought stocks in the war-related companies back then. And what has resulted in, I think some people also ask questions about China or poking in the eye of China. They are now back to Cold War, because if you put this in a bigger context, everyone is now somehow including China as being the biggest enemy, as the biggest challenge to the future of the West, to the future of the US, and they throw Russia in as well. And don't forget that China has a Uyghurs issue. They are gaining political strength. They are beginning to become the biggest economy in the whole world. So this whole thing, actually, whatever it takes, US policy is not to let any country compete with them at that level, as China is, and together with Russia, is reaching that stage. So they do want to create new geopolitical realities in which they can combat their defined enemies. And in that process, like they have done in many other countries, Afghani people, they were left bleeding and their country destroyed and the whole region in turmoil. So this is the net result. My last slide, there's a quote from Edward Said. He said, "Every empire, however, tells itself and the world that it is unlike all other empires before them, that its mission is not to plunder and control, but to educate and liberate." But actually, we all know that the reverse is true. So with that, thank you very much, everyone, for participation. We are not closing the lines. We will stay something like an hour or so online, as long as you people wish. And as Rana Saab said, if you want to ask any questions, have discussion among ourselves, among each other, please go ahead. Express your opinions, do networking, talk to each other, talk to us, and ask questions, express point of view. So thank you very much to everyone again for such an active participation. Thank you.